Do you think Putin would drop a nuke, or what? If so, what do you think would actually push him to do that? Like, what do you think his mindset is when it comes to even dropping like a small tactical nuke?
I think there is minimal chance of that, but it's not a 0% chance, maybe less than 5% chance.
Why is that?
Well, because he knows that that would absolutely set NATO off, and he would have to fear what the repercussions of that would be. We might establish a no-fly zone. We might do some other things that would ultimately, right now the Chinese and some others are staying on the sidelines. But if he used a tactical nuke, I think even they would say, no, that's too much.
Is it true that Putin can't by himself make the decision to launch a nuke?
No, I don't know that. I don't know if President Biden completely by himself can. I think he could give the order, but if some general said, what is this all about? In fact, I think there is I know there was a case in the former Soviet Union where they actually ordered a strike, and there was one commander that said they thought they saw incoming U.S. ICBMs coming in. Turned out it was something else. It was total error. And this one very sane, pragmatic Russian commander said, no, we're not going to launch, and they didn't. Otherwise, it could have been the end of the world.
So, yeah, I was under the impression that the U.S. president had the power to hit the nuclear button.
That may be true.
But and then that in Russia, it's different because people say that Putin, he looks like he has cancer. He might be going crazy. He's a mad dog backed into a corner right now because of the United States. And he could press the button because he's going crazy. But apparently he has a bunch of commanders or generals who have the ultimate decision to make that call.
That may be true. I really don't know about that. I don't know.
Interesting.
I hope it's true. I hope that there are some people that would countermand that.
When it comes to nukes, if that unfortunately were to happen, what are your feelings on mutually assured destruction? Is that still a thing, or is that...
Okay, so during the Cold War, we had this concept called mutually assured destruction, meaning that if the Russians launched strategic weapons at us, we would counterstrike. And pretty soon, not only Russia and the United States, but most of the world would be a desolate wasteland. So it was called MAD, which it was, mutually assured destruction. Mm-hmm. A tactical nuke means we're talking on the order of maybe hundreds of tons, not thousands of tons of TNT yield. The bomb that destroyed little boy that destroyed Hiroshima was a 14 kiloton weapon. That's 14,000 tons of TNT yield. That killed 140,000 people. Now, the amount of explosive power that brought down the Oklahoma Federal Building in 1996 and killed 165 people was only 1.5 tons. So if you multiply 1.5 tons by 1,000, you start to get a bare idea of what a small nuclear weapon could do. Now, a tactical nuke usually would be probably not even a kiloton. It'd be several hundreds of tons or whatever. But it would still be the type of thing where you're just opening Pandora's box. What's next then? I think there may be a greater chance he might use chemical weapons, but even that would be horrible.
Didn't they find multiple chemical weapons facilities in the Ukraine? I remember that lady, Victoria Nuland, was being...
I don't think so.
They were questioning her about that.
No. A lot of this is Russian propaganda. In fact, we have gone in, the United States, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, has made it a goal to go into states or former states of the Soviet Union and help them turn their biological weapons labs into producing, pharmaceuticals and things like that. We actually pay their scientists to convert to peaceful uses for medicines and pharmaceuticals and things like that. Okay. But the Russians have accused us of going in and equipping the Ukrainians with biological weapons programs, and that's nonsense.
What do you think would happen if the United States, our continent, actually got hit by a nuke or a bomb? What would happen if Russia actually dropped a bomb somewhere in the United States?
Well, I think we would retaliate. I mean,
do you think we would do the same?
Oh, absolutely.
Or do you think it's possible that we wouldn't retaliate? Instead, we would go in take out the regime and claim Russia for our own?
Well, I don't think we would do that, but I think we would probably do a counterstrike. In fact, I'm sure they have standing orders that if say somebody were to take out New York or Washington,
right,
that we would strike back. Now, what scares the Russians is that our non-nuclear military forces are so much more advanced than theirs. And, you know, that if all the nukes in the world disappeared, the military advantage would be heavily to our favor, not Russia.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Our weapons are much better. Our people are much better. Our military is set to devolve as much power downwards as possible to where a local field commander has a lot of authority. The opposite is true in Russia. There's top down. If you take out a Russian colonel or a general, which they've done, then the rest of them are like running around like chickens with their heads cut off because they don't know what to do.
What is your view on what's happening in Ukraine with Russia and with us? I think we just wrote them like a $13 billion check.
Well, I'm a strong supporter of defending Ukraine and against what I consider to be absolute Russian aggression. And I actually think that sentiment transcends political parties. We have a lot that divide us, but I think that both of our political parties are fairly united on supplying the Ukrainians with what they need. You know, they got invaded, and it was this type of, you know, if we had just turned our head, it would be like the appeasement that happened in the late 30s, where Hitler took over Austria, the Anschluss, and then he took over the Sudetenland, and then he basically all of Czechoslovakia, and we kept turning our eyes and appeasing him. You don't appease dictators. And so finally he invaded Poland in September of 1939, and that's when the Western Alliance, at least the British and the French, drew the line.
What would you say to people who claim that what we're doing right now with the Ukraine is the same thing that we did with the Mujahideen? To fight the Soviets.
Okay, to a certain extent. And guess what? It got the Soviets out. You know, when we gave them stingers, they had to leave.
Right.
Now, that morphed into Al-Qaeda and some other cancers. Yes, I know. But I think the difference is, and I don't have very many Afghan friends, a few, but by and large, I mean, the folks in Afghanistan were terribly divided. They had, you know, the Northern Alliance, they had the Taliban, and they had elements in the South. And they've never been a united country, frankly. They were cobbled together, and they have vast differences in religion and political outlooks and things like that. Mm-hmm. Whereas the Ukrainians are basically westernized. They think like us. They, you know, I guess I can identify with them more than I can with a different alien mindset in Afghanistan. I don't fault the administration for getting out of Afghanistan, but I do fault them for the way they did it, just abruptly, and left a lot of our friends in the lurch. I mean, I guess maybe it's because my son lost one of his best friends. My son was a Marine. He lost one of his best friends there with a suicide bomber. And you wonder, after all the money and blood that we've spent 21 years later, what have we got? We've got nothing in Afghanistan. I think, though, that our values with the Ukrainians are more common values that we share. And these people have been invaded. It's not Ukrainian against Ukrainian. Well, sometimes it is, because the Russian-speaking Ukrainians or ethnic Russians, it could be, but it was literally naked aggression of the Russians invading and trying to force, you know, we're just going to take this land.
If you look at it from Russia's perspective, that we're using the Ukraine as sort of this, as to taunt Russia, and we're using them as this, it's like this tug of war. They're just this pawn in this big tug of war between the US and Russia. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe I recently saw Oliver Stone's Putin interviews, where he did I don't know if you saw that, but it was a long form interview. It was like a couple hours long of interviews with one-on-ones with Putin. But in a lot of the NATO countries, the US has been installing intercontinental launch sites, or they call them defensive. They're defensive missile sites, but Putin's claim was that within a couple hours they could be transitioned into offensive launch sites.
Well, a lot of those countries have joined NATO because they were dominated by the Soviet Union after World War II and forced into being part of the Eastern Bloc in the Cold War and Iron Curtain. So they naturally, I mean, even now, even the Swedes and the Finns, who have traditionally been neutral since World War II, are wanting to join NATO. And this was not up until Putin invaded Ukraine. I mean, he's accomplished exactly 180 degrees what he hoped to accomplish. He's now driven most of the rational countries in that part of the world and is thinking, yeah, well, I want to be part of NATO now. I don't want to be invaded like Ukraine. Yeah, I can see what you're saying, that there can be an argument made for the Russian sense of encirclement by NATO, but they bring it on themselves by acting like the bully in the neighborhood and then getting all upset because you want to have a cop protecting you from the bully.
The financial element, the financial chokehold that we've put on them with the sanctions, from what I understand, is Russia actually has the ability to pay off their debts. However, they've been cut off from the ability to access that money.
That's right. Because for one thing, oil is typically denominated in dollars, and guess who controls that? So we've been fortunate in that respect. I think the sanctions are starting to hurt. What's hurting them, I think probably more, is the fact that thousands of young Russian boys have been killed in Ukraine, many thousands. Eventually that filters back, to people, that 15, 20,000 we're estimating dead Russians. I mean, we lost, 60,000 in the Vietnam War, but that went on for 20 years. This has only been 7 months, and they've lost maybe 15 to 20,000 dead and gosh knows how many wounded, injured. That's got to eventually, in fact, if he has to resort to conscription, meaning a draft, that's going to be a tremendous morale blow in Russia.
My whole perspective on the thing is, obviously, this is like a general overview of it, but what would have happened? Would there be all this blood and war and death if we hadn't dropped billions of dollars of armor or of weapons into Ukraine, onto the border?
If we hadn't today,
we would have stayed out.
Okay, if we had stayed out today, you'd have a Russian-dominated Ukraine. Zelensky would have been shot. A lot more Ukrainians would have died. I don't begrudge the Ukrainians a single dollar. I wish we'd given them twice as much.
Really?
Absolutely.